Hello, dear listener. Welcome to my channel, where stories are so scary that only the bravest and most fearless can listen. If you are sure that you are brave enough, subscribe to my channel and I will question your bravery. But before you do, let me warn you, these stories are not for the faint of heart. They are not for people who scare easily. They are for people with ice in their veins and darkness in their hearts. If you are one of those people, then I welcome you. Come closer, listen closely, and prepare yourself for the horror that awaits. This happened in early fall of 2011 when I was 21. I just bought a new set of night vision goggles and I had to try them out. I went off to an area that I usually hunt. The trailhead is only about a 45-minute drive from town, but the area I hunt is about a 4 to 5 hour hike. I got to the place about 5 p.m., giving me a bit of time to start the hike before it got dark. I noticed an old, beat-up green truck parked there, which to me was odd. This trail isn't maintained at all, and I've never met another person in this area in the last 10 years of hunting this place with my family. Just ignoring it, I grabbed my pack and headed out. About an hour into the hike, I came to a narrow path with thick trees on either side, but maybe 50 yards past was a clearing with a lone, massive cottonwood in the center. As I got closer, I heard crying, like someone was experiencing the end of the world type wailing. I started to jog toward the clearing, thinking maybe someone was hurt or being attacked, as there are a lot of mountain lions in this area. So many that it's actually rare that I don't see one when I'm hiking through. When I broke out to the clearing, I heard a woman shout, then a choking sound. I looked around and couldn't see anything, so I ran to the side of the lone tree. There was a woman flailing, hanging from a branch. I dropped my pack and ran to her. I tried to get myself under her to pick her up on my shoulders. She kept flailing and kicking and trying to hit me in the face. So I grabbed my knife and hugged her to get her to be still and reached up and cut the rope right around her neck. I didn't have her as tight as I thought and gave her a small cut on the neck and let her fall hard to the ground. Trying to see if she was okay, I knelt down and tried to talk to her and see if she was still breathing. She just ignored me and stared into the sky, crying. Not knowing what else to do and there being no service in the area, I grabbed her in a fireman's carry and jogged as quick as I could back to my truck. Once at my truck, still having no service, I threw her into the back seat, set my child locks, and hauled it to the hospital. In the emergency room, I carried her in. She was quiet now and not fighting. I told them we were working out in our apartment's gym and a wire fell from the ceiling, choking her while she was on a treadmill. Stupid to lie, I know that now. They took her back, and shortly after, some police showed up. One went into a room and the other pulled me to the side to ask what really happened. After telling them the truth, the officer came out and said she confirmed what really happened. They took some info from me and left. I went into her room to see how she was. I spoke a bunch about how what she was doing was not the right answer, and there are people who would be heartbroken after her death. She didn't say a word the entire time, just kept staring into the ceiling lights. I left her a note with my name and number and told her if she ever needed anything to let me know. Then I left. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from a foreign number. I ignored it, not thinking about the girl from earlier. She left me a long message, first thanking me for saving her, then telling me what all happened. She was a 17-year-old high school exchange student who, the day before her hanging, went to a party with some friends from class. There she was taken advantage of. Not wanting to shame her family, she tried to end her own life. She went on to say after a week in the hospital, she was sent back to Japan. She continued with how thankful she is for me, how she knows it was not the right thing. She gave me her number and asked to call so she can thank me properly. I called that night and spoke with her. She went on and on about how thankful she was and how amazing I must be. She then asked me for my address to send me a gift. I gave it to her. Kind of a mistake. After several weeks, we keep talking pretty often, and once a week she sends me gifts. Flowers and things from Japan. Tons of candy and just random things. She one day tells me the program is letting her go back to finish out the year, and she wants to meet with me to thank me in person over dinner. I said I guess we could meet. What harm would there be? Well, things just started to progress when she got back. Every day she would text and call wanting to meet with me again. If I ignored her, she would just keep it up with texts like every 5 minutes, asking how I'm doing, how is work, what do I want so she can buy it for me, when can she hang out, and things like that. After several more weeks of trying to tell her to relax, it's done and over, I get that she is thankful. She begins to get more personal, saying how we are destined to be together. The gods put us there at the same time for a reason. How much she misses me. How she will make an amazing wife who will cook and be a great mother to our children someday. At this point, I had had enough. She was 18 by then, but it was getting out of hand. I told her to leave me alone, but she never replied. I have horrible insomnia from my PTSD while I was in Iraq, so I take some pretty strong sleeping pills, which knock me out for at least 6 hours. Nothing will wake me. About a week after I told her to go away, I woke up at my normal time for work. When I went to get up, I saw someone was in my bed. I knew it was her right away. I stood up and shouted, "What in God's name are you doing?" She woke up, still all sleepy-eyed, and said some stuff in Japanese. I yelled at her to speak English. She then said, "See, my love, I'm showing you how good we can sleep together. You will never know I'm here, but I can comfort you during your bad dreams. Doesn't that make you happy?" I was livid. I asked how she got in, and she told me by my sliding glass door. To clarify, I live on the outskirts of a large city. By Wyoming standards, on 40 acres, I have a shooting range which I use daily after work. I go out back through my sliding door and usually forget to lock it. I told her to get out and to never come back. The rest of the school year went by and I didn't hear a word from her. Summer came, and knowing she went back to Japan, I relaxed and everything more or less went back to normal. Although I did change my phone number just to be safe. A few days into August 2012 came and I had a knock at my door. I opened it thinking it was the mailman or something. Nope, it was her. She had the biggest smile on her face. Before I could force her to leave, she told me my number didn't work anymore, so she came in person to tell me she was accepted to the local college and will be able to be close to me again. Before she could say her next sentence, I told her that I hate you. I couldn't care less if she died. She took off running and crying to her truck. Kind of feeling bad about what I said, I didn't feel like cooking, so about 10 minutes later I left to get something to eat. Halfway down the road I noticed traffic was backed up, which is crazy because I'm in a rural area. There isn't many people here to begin with. When I finally got up to the point that started the traffic, I saw it was a rollover. A disgusting old green truck was rolled over into a ditch with police, fire trucks, and ambulance all around. I rushed right to the hospital, feeling like absolute garbage. After several hours, they finally let me in to see her. She had a few broken ribs, right arm and left leg broken, and a torn muscle in her neck. Before I had a chance to even walk into the room, she was crying her eyes out, saying how sorry she is, how she never meant to anger me. I also apologized, and we both agreed to restart and just try to be normal friends. We were married in 2015 and had our first child later that year. We have been happy together ever since. She still gives me guff about how she finally got her way and she was right all along. But somehow, through all the crazy, I still love the ever-living life out of her. The story happened to my dad and his wife. He was driving in the middle of nowhere in Utah, I believe, and he and his wife wanted to make a stop at a gas station to get snacks, use the bathroom, etc. When he got to the gas station, he saw a police car parked out in the lot. When they walked into the gas station, he saw a man at the register. My dad saw that the man was listening to a police radio. My dad didn't really think anything of it. He asked the man if he needed a key to the bathroom, and the man looked pretty anxious and uncomfortable. The man told my dad that he didn't think that he needed one, so my dad walked to the bathroom. Right before he went in, he saw a doorway with a curtain in front of it, next to the bathroom door. My dad looked at the end of the curtain, and all he saw was a man's feet with what he believes to be the police officer's shoes. My dad tried to stay calm, so he walked into the bathroom and just stood there contemplating what to do. He got himself to calm down. Then he walked calmly out of the bathroom and went to his wife and calmly said, "Hey babe, let's go, I'm pretty tired and Mark is waiting for us." My dad just wanted to make sure this guy couldn't do something to them if he said someone was waiting for him. She looked confused, but then understood what he was trying to do. So they paid for gas and left that place. What my dad thinks happened is that the guy ended the life of the police officer, and he took his police radio to make sure no one was trying to contact the police. But while he was hiding the body, my dad and his wife drove into the lot, so he pretended to be the cashier there. I asked my dad why he never called the police, and he said that if he did, the guy at the gas station would hear the dispatcher, and he would go after my dad. They were on a road trip and had a huge trailer, and that guy could have easily have caught them. I'm an 18-year-old female living in Australia. This true story happened to me about 4 years ago when I was around 14, still in high school. It was after school on a Monday, and I had band practice, which ran from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Just outside the front gates of my school, there was a large grass oval. The oval had gum trees surrounding the outside of it, almost like a border. Usually after band, I would cross straight through that oval to get to the train station on the other side. It was possible to walk around the oval along the footpath next to the road, but most students would just cross through the oval as it was a quicker route to get to the station. The only difference this time was I was alone crossing the oval on that day. After band practice, all my friends and other classmates had already been picked up by parents or had left earlier. Still, for some reason, I hadn't thought twice about crossing the oval alone. In my mind, it was just a 5-minute walk across in broad daylight, and I really needed to hurry so that I wouldn't miss my train. As I was walking across the oval with my heavy backpack and clarinet in hand, everything seemed to be going fine. That was until I got about halfway, and suddenly heard a man's voice from behind me. "Excuse me, could you help me?" The voice belonging to this person didn't sound too strange or like there was any ill intent behind the words at first. Figuring this was just someone who needed directions or something, I didn't hesitate to turn around. What I saw then terrified and confused young 14-year-old me. There was a disheveled man who looked to be probably in his 30s laying under one of the gum trees, almost hidden on the edge of the oval. He had a yellow striped tennis bag sitting next to him on the grass and something fleshy and pink gripped in his hand. I didn't notice this immediately, but when I was able to see and comprehend what he was doing, I immediately felt sick to my stomach. Sure, I might have been young and naive, but I knew instantly that what he was doing was far from innocent. The man stared at me and gave me a creepy grin. He motioned with his eyes down toward what he was doing before looking right back at me. I clenched my fists and spun back around, walking briskly back in the direction I was heading. Every nerve in me was on end, just waiting for something terrible to happen. Despite the panic rising rapidly within me, I just kept telling myself to act calmly and continue walking towards the train station. I kept a close ear out behind me, waiting to hear footsteps following. I didn't hear his footsteps, but I heard him try to get my attention once more by calling out, "Hey, excuse me." I ignored him and didn't dare turn around. After what felt like a lifetime, I finally reached the train station platform, where I was so relieved to see that other people were waiting there. My train was slowing to a stop ahead, so I didn't get much time to survey the oval behind me. There, I saw the man again with that same yellow striped bag I saw earlier slung over his shoulder. He was walking lazily towards the train station, though it didn't seem like he was in any rush to get there, as if this was just another failed attempt at finding some kind of kid to meet his disgusting requests. I gladly hopped on the train and kept watching him just in case through that train window until he was out of sight. I was finally able to let out a breath that I didn't even know I was holding. I got my phone out and called my mom, telling her something bad had happened and that I would tell her when I saw her. I could hear the worry in her voice, and she quickly picked me up from the train stop near my house. I shakily told her everything, and she took me to the police station, where I made a statement about the whole thing. It was a lot to handle for a 14-year-old, and it made me feel ill retelling the events over and over. A couple of weeks later, a call back from the police stated that they never found the man. And from that point onwards, I always asked my mom to pick me up after band practice, or I just take the long way around to the train with my friends. What still sickens me to this day is the fact that this guy was knowingly laying right next to a school. I can only hope that he never tried what he did to me on any other innocent, unsuspecting children. I'm 15 years old and was absolutely horrified by this person. I'm interested in something called roleplay. I only had started once I had spent my 7th, 8th, and 9th grade summer alone, due to bad friends and depression. I use an app called Amino and had gotten interested in the show called Riverdale. I met amazing people in this app, but also terrible people. As a shy girl, I'm usually very kind and afraid to hurt someone's feelings or say no, which got me into a lot of trouble. I met a boy who I'll just call Cheryl, since that was the account the boy had at the time. He and I started out as good friends, talking a lot and even shared common interests. I'm a lesbian and not into guys for obvious reasons, and since I'm a lesbian, I felt horrible when he told me he had feelings for me. I apologized profusely because I wasn't into dudes. After that, we stopped talking for a little before I started to have him leave messages on my account, spamming me with a request on Discord, which was now deleted, and even found my Snapchat and Instagram. And this was horrifying, and I didn't understand why he was bothering me. So one night I messaged him on Amino asking him to please stop, and then I wasn't liking how he was acting. He apologized and we became friends for a little, role-playing Riverdale bits and talking now and then. One night when I was up late, he and I had been talking. He said he was now transgender, and said now that he was trans and still deeply in love with me, we could date. I shook my head at this because, yes, I was lesbian, but I didn't want to be with him after all the ways he treated me. Soon enough, he started to get angry. He called me all sorts of terrible names, told me I was dumb and worthless, and even reported me to Amino for what I hadn't done. I soon messaged the creator on Amino and asked her to please tell him to stop, and she did, and also suspended his account for 24 hours. I blocked him, and we never really talked. I occasionally get messages, but to this day, I still just ignore them. One summer, my parents had booked a cabin for us for a whole week. I can't remember exactly how old I was. I'm guessing about 12. Me, my big sister, and my little brother had been playing and exploring outside all day. We were tired, so when our parents asked if we wanted to go to the grocery store with them, me and my sister said no. My little brother wanted to go, and he was too young to be under our supervision anyways, even if he wanted to stay. They said that they would be back soon, and they trusted us enough to leave us back at the cabin, as long as we promised to stay inside and stay away from the lake. Both my parents were always very strict about not letting us swim unauthorized. A couple of moments passed with me and my sister chatting until she decided to take a nap on the couch. I had been chugging juice all evening, so I needed to head to the toilet. The toilet was a separate building near the main cabin, closer to the lake. It was about 8 o'clock, and the evening had already started to darken since it was almost October. I've always loved scary stories, and I enjoyed the mystic nightfall. I was halfway to the toilet when, suddenly, I heard a loud crack in the woods. The sound came from right in front of me, behind the toilet. I froze and stood quiet for a while. I saw nothing. I thought that it might have been a big animal, so I ran straight towards the toilet. I closed the door quickly behind me. After catching my breath, I peeked from its little window, and I heard more loud movement. It did sound like a big animal right behind the toilet. More branches cracking, then a big splash. Something had just jumped into the lake. I thought the route was clear enough and slammed open the door. I started running back to the main cabin, not looking back. All of a sudden, I heard my dad's voice calling my name. I stopped and listened. I was now 100% sure that it was indeed my dad's voice. Before I turned my head towards the voice, I could see that our car was not in the driveway yet. I got chills and turned to where the voice came from, the lake. To my confusion, I saw my dad, floating in the lake, absolutely still, with a frozen smile on his face. For a moment, I thought that he hadn't left after all. "Come here," he was shouting, again and again with the same stiff voice. I saw no movement in the water. It's like he just stood there, but it was way too far from the coast or his, or anyone's legs could reach the bottom. I realized almost immediately that this was not my dad. My legs went numb from fear, but I got back to the main cabin, crying my eyes out in panic. I was too afraid to look out the window and just locked the doors. My sister was still asleep, and just when I was about to wake her up, I heard a car. I looked from the kitchen window and soon saw my mom, brother, and my dad coming out of the car, smiling and laughing. My whole body was cold. The whole situation felt unreal. I asked my father later, had he been in the water before? He was confused and laughed it off with, "Maybe it was a big fish in there." I tried to forget what I saw and heard, but I still can't. I wasn't dreaming. It was something I can't explain with logic. I'm 24 years old now, and I'm still afraid that I will someday experience something like this again. I try not to think what would have happened if I had followed him into the water. This happened back in November of 2018. I woke up early that morning at around 7:30 a.m. My wife usually works earlier shifts, and I drive her to work. We made it to her work at around 8, and I got home at around 8:30. I normally work evening shifts at my job, so I try to get some more sleep as soon as I get home. That morning when I got home, I went back into bed in an attempt to fall back asleep. About 10 minutes rolled by when I got a knock on the door. My wife and I live next to most of my in-laws, so I just assumed it was one of them. I wasn't going to answer it, but the knocking continued. I got up to answer the door, thinking it would be one of my in-laws. To my surprise, it was this man that I had never met before. He was skinny, was about 5'8", the same height as me. He proceeded to ask me if I came up to his house and put his girlfriend in my car. I immediately told him no. At the time the story occurred, my wife and I were just engaged. I told him I took my fiancée to work and came home. He kept insisting that I came up to his house, but I told him if I did, I would be honest and say that I did. As soon as I told him that, he then went on to talk about his boots and how nice they were, which I thought was kind of weird. That gave me the impression that he was probably on drugs. He left my house afterward and went home. About 15 minutes later, he came back to my house and knocked on the door. When I answered, he said he just left his girlfriend's present on my porch. I played it safe and said okay, but I didn't remember seeing the present. The present he held up to me looked like a cheap makeup set you would give a 10-year-old. Definitely not something you would give your adult girlfriend. At this point, I got very suspicious. After I shut the door again, I peeked out the living room window to see if he was still outside. He was standing right by my brother-in-law's truck, which was close to my vehicle, looking straight at my house. It felt like we made direct eye contact. That should have been when I called the police, but once again, I let it go. 3 hours went by, and I still kept replaying the scenario in my head. I had just gotten out of the shower when I heard another knock on the door. I knew it was him again because the knock seemed more like a bang. I began to panic, trying to call my brother-in-law who lived next door and debating on if I should call the police. I proceeded to open the door. To no surprise, it was him. As soon as he saw me, he asked me whose car was outside of my house, and I told him it was mine. At that moment, his entire persona just changed. He began getting very angry. He insisted that his friend saw his girlfriend get in my car and began talking about fighting me. I remember the words he said to me. "You come out here and we'll settle this like men instead of staying in your house. That's what sissies do." I'll never forget his piercing stare as if he had completely lost his mind. Being afraid because I didn't know the guy, I tried to be the bigger person and just explain to him that I didn't do it. But the way he looked at me and talked to me really started to tick me off. I didn't know what to do. I told him to hang on a minute, and the more aggravated tone began to walk outside. Within the few seconds it took me to go out to my porch, it was like a switch just flipped inside my head. I was just so angry that this guy, who I didn't even know, had accused me of something I didn't do, and had bothered me 3 times in one day. I just blacked out and began yelling at the guy. He jumped off my porch before I even got outside, but continued to run his mouth. I told him to get off my property before I called the cops, which sent him running. I called the police right after, and my sister-in-law came to check on me. My brother-in-law came over soon after as well. 10 minutes after I called 911, the police arrived. I didn't know much about the guy other than what he looked like, but my in-laws knew the guy's name and where he lived. I slammed the door as he began to run away, so I didn't see how he left. My in-laws told the police and I that he left in a car, which they knew the type and model of. They knew vital information that helped the police track this guy down. They went into the direction the car he was in went. When they couldn't find him then, the police pulled up to his house. They approached him as he was walking toward his home, not too long after they parked. I don't know what the police said to him, but whatever they did, it worked. I stood outside my house as my grandmother-in-law pulled up and handed me a package for my wife. At the same time, the police left. The guy walked out onto the road beside his house and just stood there, staring at me. I didn't let it faze me and just continued to grab the package, going on about the rest of my day. As I left to pick up my wife from work later on, my in-laws stayed at the house to make sure everything was unharmed. The guy came back down and told my in-laws to tell me he was sorry. My other brother-in-law, who is now deceased, approached the guy to find out why he had a problem with me. They didn't get along, but my brother-in-law put their differences aside to figure out what the problem was. Just as I suspected, the guy was on drugs. He had been doing meth that night before, and I'm guessing his friend was too. My wife and his girlfriend both had the same hair color. When I took my wife to work that morning, either he or his friend saw my wife and thought she was his girlfriend. Though that doesn't justify what he did, I'm glad I know now why this all happened. To this day, that stands as the most terrifying experience of my life. Never in my life have I ever felt more scared and endangered than that day. I just thank God it didn't turn out worse than it did. He really had his hand on me that day. I don't have any problems with this guy anymore, but needless to say, he's the reason why I own a gun now. Let's start with all the introductions first. I'm a 37-year-old woman with a bit of a psychic twinkle. I'm a sensitive empath, which basically means I can sense spiritual presences and I can pick up other emotions. My mother's the same, as was my grandfather. My grandma, not so much. She doesn't believe in all that nonsense, as she says. I'm not a medium by any means. I have seen ghosts with my own eyes since I was 7, but they don't appear to me all the time. They don't talk to me. I can't call upon the spirits for information. That has never been my gift, but I can tell if one is around. I can feel their energy and my body reacts in certain ways. My mom and I jokingly call it our spidey sense. Apart from the fact that I am a practicing third-generation witch, I have also been a paranormal investigator for 19 years now. I run an investigation team by the name of Paranormal MIT. And I know it is weird, but when it comes to investigations, I prefer to take a scientific approach rather than a metaphysical one. The reason being is proof. Someone can say they feel a presence, but how do you prove a feeling? You can't. It is personal. It can't be documented. It can't be shared unless you were there. As such, it can't be considered evidence. Those are my personal thoughts. I'm also of the mind that any evidence that is presented should be scrutinized and analyzed severely before publication. Why? Because there is so much fake nonsense out there that people present to the public on the daily that any real evidence gets buried, and it makes it that much harder to believe. It makes me so angry. I would give anything to capture that one piece of irrefutable proof that ghosts exist and present it to the world. I know they exist. I have had so many experiences throughout my life, there can be no doubt. All I can do is share my experiences and hope that someone believes me. That being said, the following is a true account of a shared experience with my mom that happened earlier this year. My grandma had just had surgery to repair some fractured discs in her back that she had sustained from a recent fall. They sent her to a convalescent home to recover for a month before returning to her retirement community. This wasn't the first time she had been there. She had had knee surgery several years before and stayed in the same home. I remember visiting her back then and really getting an icky vibe from the side hallway near the front. Something just felt off. But nothing other than that ever happened back then. Moving forward to earlier this year, we went to visit her. I was kind of dreading it because I remember the icky feeling from that hallway and wasn't keen to experience that again. But to my surprise, when we walked through the door, it was a fresh, lighter feeling than I remembered. I also noticed that the place had been remodeled and rearranged. As a single-story building with a rose garden out front, with a little fountain and white picket fence. You walk through the front doors into a sort of octagonal lobby with a front desk and hallways that shoot off in different directions. It is a lot bigger inside than it looks on the outside. One hallway is long and leads to the back section of the building where, I didn't know at the time, the men's rooms were. I had commented that the Finch atrium was gone from the front lobby area as soon as we walked in. The woman at the front desk overheard me and said that they still have it, that it had just been moved to the new rec room in the back of the building. I thanked her and my mom said we would go find it after our visit. An hour and a half later, we said our goodbyes to Grandma and went in search of the Finches. Mom and I took the long hallway to the back of the building and made a right into another hallway and heard the TV blasting from the rec room down at the end. As soon as we turned down the back hallway, my spidey senses started tingling. It was like the feeling from the front hallway many years ago, but not as overwhelming. Seeing as it was so faint, I shrugged it off and didn't even mention it. We got to the rec room and saw that there were two women there. One was clearly visiting the other, as one woman was about my mom's age. The other lady, who was in a wheelchair, looked to be about 90. The younger of the two had brought along her two mini poodles, and they were busy chasing the little Finches back and forth in their atrium. It was a tall glass case in a polished wooden frame with ornate carvings in the corners. Very posh, in my opinion. I tried to get the poodles' attention to get some lovies, but they were far too distracted. We were in there for maybe 30 seconds when everything changed. Okay, for those who are not sensitives, I am going to try to explain how a spirit's presence can affect your body. There's the head squeezy, as my mom and I call it, which basically feels like someone pressing their palms into both your temples or side of your head at the same time. Sometimes it's a light pressure, other times it can hit you like a migraine. There's what my mom calls the push, where you can feel the pressure either in the small or middle of your back, like a hand pushing you forward, and the bit you feel pressure on gets a bit tingly. I don't normally get that, but I have a few times, but it happens to my mom a lot. Then, of course, the hairs on your arms and back of the neck. Goosebumps. That's what I call stony baloney eyes. which, as the name suggests, you can equate it to the feel you get after you take a hit and the high is just kicking in. When you feel like you're wearing a masquerade mask that's a little too tight. Anywho, we were in the rec room for no more than 30 seconds when the atmosphere changed. I can only describe it as if you're outside on a mild, warm day with a cool breeze. Then suddenly a thick cloud blocks the sun, and in the shade the temperature drops, and suddenly that cool breeze is downright chilly. Kinda like that. Mom and I looked at each other with wide eyes, and without a word we both turned and headed for the door. At this point we both felt the presences, but perhaps our awkward and sudden departure tipped off said spirit to the fact that we knew it was there. Big mistake. Before we left the room we both got hit with head squeezies. But not the nice gentle pressure ones, oh no. This one was a slam. I can only speak for myself, but this was not a, hey, I'm just letting you know I'm here kind of squeeze. This was an angry, you can feel me. You can feel me and you're trying to run away, get back here kind of squeeze. So my mom and I are now speed walking down the side hall, trying not to cause a scene. She's feeling her push. I'm starting to get severely dizzy by intense head squeezy and stony baloney eyes. So dizzy I end up shoulder checking the wall on the left side. My mom is saying, I know, me too. Just hang on till we get outside. Immediately I start getting impressions. It is male, strong, and very, very angry. Possibly a recent death. Truth is, I never looked into it. We get outside and the feeling doesn't ease up. I ended up gripping the fence in the rose garden, and it took everything for me not to lose my lunch. Wave after wave of nausea and dizziness hit me. Mom turned to me and said, I know you're worse off than me, but I cannot have this follow me home. Can you do something? So I started reciting my closing spiel I usually end my investigations with. Thank you, spirits, for communicating with us. At this time, we will be taking our leave, and you are not permitted to leave this place. We do not consent to being followed any further, and you must remain here. You must not follow us past this point. It is not allowed. We hurried to the car, and she turned the engine over as soon as her key found the ignition. Before she moved, I touched the dashboard and recited a spell. Keeper of bones, I know thy face, but I may yet outstrip thy pace. As we pulled up to our house, we were feeling a bit better, but still felt an attachment. So I recited one last spell in front of the door. Who comes to me, I keep. Who goes from me, I free. But against all I stand, who carry not my key. We entered her house, and I felt instant relief. I don't know who this guy was, but even if I had my equipment with me to take measurements, I don't think I could have stayed any longer than I did. I've never felt a presence that strong before or after. I am not opposed to helping spirits, but if they attack me, intentionally or accidentally, all bets are off. In July 2008, I believe it was the 30th, me and my buddy drove to Manitoba in order to pick up some medicines for an upcoming sweat. So we get to west of Portage La Prairie, and my buddy pulls into a gas station because he has to use the bathroom. I begin to doze off when all of a sudden I feel two cold and bony hands wrap around my throat. The smell of decay fills my nostrils, and it makes my eyes water. I've been hunting quite a lot, and I have, of course, stumbled upon animal carcasses rotting. But that is the smell I would readily prefer over the smell that this creature emitted. I can't move my head as I try to see what is on top of me. I can feel tears starting to run down my face as black dots started to dance in front of my eyes. Bang, bang, bang. I look over at the window of the truck and see my buddy smashing his hands against the window. He looks petrified and keeps screaming a word over and over, and I can't hear what it was over the ringing in my ears. I read his lips and my blood runs cold. He's screaming the word wendigo. I think back to when I was a little kid and I had stayed up past sundown on a bitter winter evening. My father is waiting outside. He has a scared yet stern look on his face and says, You better get inside the house, boy. There are man-eaters in these woods. For years, I pestered him over and over about what he's talking about, and that's when he finally tells me about the wendigo, the ravenous spirits that look to possess weak-willed or starving people. They're cannibals born from the harsh circumstances of the great winters that have occurred. I remember my father said all you need to do is blow a puff of air at it, and if you are pure and strong intentions, then it vanishes in search of its next meal. However, if you are a greedy and weak-willed person, it will possess you and make you into one of them. You will constantly crave meat, but only the flesh of man will satiate your hunger. But that relief is only a few moments. Then you will be on the hunt for your next meal, walking around the woods with a constant void in your stomach and a craving stuck in your mind. I turn slightly towards the beast and puff a breath in its direction. All of a sudden, the horrid smell of decay vanishes and the hands disappear. I feel an overwhelming urge to vomit, creeping up my throat, but I restrain myself. My buddy hops into the truck. We're both silent as we drive on. Our breaths are the only sounds to break up the silence. We drive for around 10 minutes before my buddy shouts. He slams on the brakes and screeches to a halt and almost collides with the car in front of us. The car turns around and we see what is causing the sudden blockage in traffic. A Greyhound bus is pulled over to the side and a bunch of shaken-looking people are standing beside it. Their gazes can only be described as a 1,000-yard stare. RCMP cruisers surround the bus. The red and blue lights dance on our windows. My buddy turns around, swearing at the inconvenience, and we drive back to a shady hotel we had passed earlier. The whole way there, I'm sitting motionlessly. A sense of dread is ever present in my gut as we arrive at the hotel. We check in and start putting our stuff down when my buddy turns on the news. It's a pretty terrible television, but soon enough we see breaking news flash across the screen and I stop what I'm doing. The news reporter looks shaken as she rattles off. One adult male is confirmed to be dead in what is to be called a frenzied knife attack. We're getting multiple reports of the suspect consuming parts of the male's body. The police have not commented any further. I look over to my buddy and he's gone ashen white. He looks over at me and says in a withdrawn voice, "I guess the wendigo needed to be fed." The victim was Tim Macklin. He was brutally murdered on a Greyhound bus, number 1170, by a man named Vince Lee, who was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. He told investigators that God told him to kill Tim. Tim Macklin was sleeping as Vice stabbed him and was awoken to a crazed Vince standing over him holding a hunting knife. Tim was stabbed over 60 times and dismembered. Vince consumed parts of his head and actually stuffed chunks of Tim into his pockets. Want to know the best part? Vince Lee was released with a new name and no criminal record. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and was excused from his actions. So all of the Americans that complain about your justice system, be thankful that they at least give out appropriate sentences for individuals like these. To this day, I wonder if Tim Macklin could see the crazed wendigo staring back at him as he looked into his killer's eyes, begging for mercy. I'm sure you've heard the saying, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I mean, everyone who doesn't live under a rock has heard it. Well, it is true. If you find a way to eke out a living doing something you truly enjoy, something that brings you great pleasure, then you will enjoy going to work and it won't even feel like work. Your life won't feel tedious, dull, boring, or like a dead end. It won't feel like you're just punching a clock until your time comes to push daisies. I'm extremely fortunate that I managed to earn a substantial living doing what I love to do. However, it is not so simple. You see, what I love to do is depraved, sick, vile, immoral, disgusting, uncivilized, and, according to the law, highly illegal. I love to cause pain. I get great pleasure from the look of sheer terror in a person's eyes as they realize what is going to happen to them. I long for the sound of the victim screaming in great agony as they writhe in anguish. I love the knowledge that when I finally decide to deliver the sweet release of death to my victims, thereby relieving them of their suffering, it is on my terms, and my face will be the very last thing they see, assuming they still have their eyes. Before you even consider calling me and my hobby, or rather my livelihood, sick, twisted, depraved, and evil, save your much-needed breath. I have heard those things many times before, and quite frankly, I am sick and tired of so-called normal people judging me. They will never understand me and the way my brain functions. Besides, killing and causing pain is human nature. Just look at the video games we play, the movies we watch, the wars we start, the news stories that are featured on TV and the internet, the religions we follow, and just about everything else humans do. All humans have dark and depraved sides just waiting to be let out. I am just more human than most, because my dark side is all my sides, and it doesn't have to wait to be given free reign over my body. It gets plenty of exercise and fresh air, but unfortunately it also has to spend a lot of time in dark rooms and basements like this one. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only serial killer you've heard of. I mean, everyone knows of Ted Bundy. Although I personally find his victim count low, his methods sloppy and uninventive, and the fact that he got caught makes him a disgrace to his kind. Also, I'm sure you have some rudimentary understanding of the evil in this world from the way people like me are portrayed in movies, books, TV, the news, and the like. I'm sure that this pre-existing knowledge, combined with what I just told you, gives you an idea of what I am and what I'm capable of. What you are probably so confused about, however, is how I turn this evil hobby into a way to make more money than a Wall Street banker. Well, there are the obvious ways. Gun for hire, kidnapping people for sale and trafficking at certain rates, illegal organ sales, stealing from the victims, being a hired blade gun weapon for certain organized crimes, extracting information from people. These methods are millennia old, but with the birth of dark web forums and people posting their whereabouts on social media 24/7, my profession has become much easier and more lucrative. However, the biggest cash flow comes from something that really shows how depraved and repressed humans are. I film what I do and make it available for a price on the dark web. These videos are used as training videos for others like me, but more often, they're used as certain guilty pleasures for all the sick freaks out there that aren't capable or willing to get their own hands dirty. I even take video requests for an extra fee, of course. I can kidnap whoever the client desires and do most anything to them. Oftentimes, the client just wants the victim gone for good, but as long as the client is fine with it, I can make extra money by letting others pick the methods of torture, the cause of death, and all of the other sordid details of the last hours of the victim. Sometimes these videos are even live, with paid viewers determining the victim's destiny through the comments section. It would truly shock you how many people watch these videos and leave comments and requests. But it doesn't shock me, at least not anymore. I already told you the world is a sick place. You see, I may be a sick monster, but if a large portion of humanity wasn't also depraved, I would be a poor monster. Many people have urges and desires, but they are too weak or scared to act upon them. Me, I act. I have the skills to live my fantasies hands-on instead of vicariously through others while I watch through a screen. Why am I telling you this? Well, sometimes I need to get why I cut open chests off my chest, both to brag and as a form of therapy. And besides, I figured you may be interested in who is about to torture you, and the reason that you're suffering an eventual death caused by your inability to pay a mafia loan shark on time is going to be uploaded to a forum full of torture and snuff. Now smile for the camera. My name is Ben Jensen. For the first 15 years of my life, I lived among members of a doomsday cult that believed with all their hearts that the world would be soon ending. hidden away in our compound on the shores of Lake Eildon, Australia. We lived behind a wall of thick foliage and barbed wire, completely cut off from the outside world. Out of the 6 male children that resided in the compound, 5 of us were made to wear the same blue velvet uniform and bleached blonde hair. We looked almost identical. We would also take part in joint activities every morning, including yoga practice. But one morning in August of 1987, our world did indeed end. But not in the way our leaders had imagined. Up until that day, my entire world was shaped and controlled by Anne Hamilton Byrne, an intensely charismatic yogi who had founded the movement she called the Family. Officially, we would be known as the Santini Ketton Park Association, or the Great White Brotherhood. But among ourselves, we simply referred to each other as the Family. Members believed that Anne was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, and that when the world ended, they would be responsible for re-educating the survivors. But that morning, after yoga practice, we children were horrified to find ourselves being gathered up by uniformed policemen. There was shouting, screaming, begging and crying, but nothing helped. We were soon whisked away from the 5-acre compound into a new kind of world that would take me years to fully comprehend. The real world. The other children and I were told that Anne Hamilton Byrne was our mother, but the day-to-day job of raising us was left to other members of the cult's inner circle, women we called aunties. We woke up at 5 a.m. every single day in dormitory-style bunk beds and followed the exact same unchanged routine. Yoga, meditation, education, homework, bed. A huge part of the education we received taught us to avoid outsiders at all costs. If anyone approached us, who we didn't recognize as being part of the family, we were told to follow the mantra of unseen, unheard, unknown. It was strictly forbidden to communicate with anyone we didn't know directly, lest we give away important family secrets to outsiders. We were only allowed to eat small vegetarian meals, as Anne Hamilton Byrne had strictly forbidden all consumption of meat on the compound. Any rule breaking was met with brutal punishment. The aunties would sometimes hold our heads on the water if we were naughty, or if we were really bad, we'd be made to hold our hands over lit candles until they burned us. But that was nothing compared to the raw, naked fear we felt whenever Anne presided over our punishments. She would verbally berate us to the point of tears before beating us horribly with her stiletto heels. More than once, her heels would break the skin. I'm pretty sure some of the other kids still have scars as a result of her punishments, both physical and mental. Another way Anne exerted control over us and the other cult members was through drugs. Us children were fed a steady diet of pills that we would only later discover were sedatives, such as Valium or Mogadon. But the adults had it even worse. They and the older teenagers present were obligated to take part in regular ceremonies known as clearings. It was during these clearings that Anne forced the cult members to take large amounts of LSD before she essentially began to brainwash them, strengthening the family members' devotion to her and only her. I hated my childhood, but it was all I knew. Not only that, but my suffering was shared by all the other children. We all looked alike. We all talked alike. I was nothing special. The adults, led by Anne, created every aspect of our reality for us. We had absolutely no other points of reference, no competing narrative. That all changed the day the police arrived. Lying in the bed of the child detention facility on my first night away from Eildon compound, I went over everything I'd said to officials that day, wondering if I'd given anything away that could get me in trouble with Anne. It took me a while to really come to terms with the fact that us children would not be returning to Lake Eildon, that the lives we'd been forced to lead didn't matter anymore. For the first time in my life, I realized I was free. But as the truth started to finally come out, it nearly broke me. I was not 15, as I had been repeatedly told. I was 14. I was given an extra year to my age because I had supposedly taken the place of a child that had died a year before I was born. I was treated as a replacement, a reincarnation of the deceased child's spirit. I learned that Anne was not my mother at all, that my real mom was one of the aunties by the name of Joy. This was incredibly confusing for me. I'd never liked Joy, and she'd never shown me an ounce of love or affection. To think she was my biological mother was psychologically scarring in ways I can't really describe. It also came to light that the other boys and girls on the compound were not my siblings. Some were the children of other cult members, while others were simply orphans that the family had adopted through various agencies. Finally, and perhaps the most obvious revelation, was that Anne Hamilton Byrne was not the reincarnation of Christ, nor did she possess any kind of supernatural abilities or foresight. She was just a woman, and a crazy one at that. I had suddenly and involuntarily come to a stage in my life where it was a case of, well, what now? What are the rules? How do I function? After hours and hours in the chair of the child psychologist, I was finally given the all-clear to begin attending a regular Australian school. Needless to say, I struggled to fit in. Whenever any of the other kids tried to reach out to me, I would quickly push them away. I didn't understand why at the time, but later I came to realize that it was because any children in the family that showed any signs of bonding were quickly separated. Friendship was something I had never experienced. But even if I had, to build friendships you need common ground, shared interests. I had none of that. As a result of the isolation, I had suffered and struggled with severe depression. But the people around me, especially the teachers, were extremely sympathetic to my situation. The raid on the Eildon compound and the subsequent arrest of the cult leaders was national news in Australia. Everyone knew our story. I remember a teacher telling me that adjusting to regular life would take time. She told me I'd have to learn how to relate to people. I took this advice to heart. Shortly after, I moved out of the children's home and into a foster home. The foster family I stayed with were churchgoers, and I feel like this helped me adjust to regular life in ways other things couldn't. I began to feel increasingly at home. But eventually, I met a girl, got married, and had 2 children, now aged 18 and 20. I've also held down a job over at IBM for almost 23 years now. I feel like the number one thing I need to get across to people is that no matter how terrible your childhood is, no matter what upheaval or chaos a person may suffer, it is never too late for them. With kind people, time, and patience, I feel as though just about anyone can find it in themselves to get better, to readjust, to earn the happiness and peace that I feel everyone so richly deserves. For more bone-chilling narratives that will keep you at the edge of your seat, subscribe to my channel. By doing so, you'll gain access to a growing collection of real-life horror stories that will both captivate and energize your senses. Join the community of fellow enthusiasts, and together, let's explore the eerie unknown. Subscribe now, and prepare for more terrifyingly true tales that will leave you craving more.